Agnes Godard crafts images that provides viewers with a tactile and sensory experience that uses textural photography, soft but naturalistic light, and an abundance of close-ups to immerse the audience and create a visceral impression of how the characters navigate the world. So let's dive a bit deeper into how she became a DP, her thoughts on cinematography, and look at some of the gear she uses to create images. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform you can use to build a website for your business. After graduating from film school, she began working in the camera department as a technician, most notably working as an assistant on movies by Wim Wenders. In fact, it was on one of those shoots, Paris, Texas, where she met another crew member, Claire Denis, who was working as an assistant director. When Denis embarked on her first feature as a director, she selected Godard as the camera operator. She later stepped up as a director of photography on most of her subsequent films, forming a long-running collaborative relationship with Denis, whose work often focused on intimate portraits of characters on the edges of society.
Moi j'ai eu une très longue collaboration, on peut dire, avec Claudine, on a fait 16 films ensemble, c'est beaucoup comme réflexion, c'est que plus on est allé vers quelque chose qui est la concision, finalement, plus c'est devenu dense et fort, quoi. Et je me suis rendu compte que parfois, la simplicité, c'est le résultat d'un travail, d'une maturation.
Much of her work condenses the photography into a fairly simplistic approach, where how the camera moves and how scenes are lit isn't overly convoluted, choreographed, or rehearsed. She strives to make the presence of the camera disappear and have each shot contain everything that needs to be said in a primitive, simplistic way. As a result, I'd say much of her work errs on the side of naturalism or realism, sometimes elevated by an experimental edit. When shooting exteriors, she embraces the natural light and doesn't try to over-diffuse it, shape it, or try to contain it. However, I wouldn't say that her approach is purely centered on realism either. Sometimes she'll add color to her lighting, going with a sharp blue for night exteriors or a cool teal for street scenes. Another component of photography which she elevates out of the ordinary into more of a dreamy, meandering state is how she frames shots and moves the camera. Her frames will often flow over spaces and characters with gradual pans and tilts, or take on a rougher handheld perspective. This framing and movement is considered and based on the foundational idea in her photography that the camera can be used to shape the perspective and the emotional and physical proximity to the characters.
En termes d'image, la perspective, c'est quelque chose qui nomme une distance d'abord. Alors on va dire en termes d'image, la distance à laquelle on regarde un sujet filmé, la distance à laquelle va être placée la caméra, c'est quelque chose de très important. La distance avec laquelle on va côtoyer les personnages d'un film.
The perspective of the camera is rarely locked onto one character throughout a movie, and instead drifts from person to person, or from detail to detail, like the wandering eyes of an observer in a room that is never seen. This drifting style of operating allows audiences to peruse different details within the frame as the camera tilts or pans from objects, textures, or details up to the subject. To get this feeling, she'll often position the perspective of the camera to be quite close to whatever is being filmed, filling the frame with tactile close-ups, whether those be of characters, cutaways to details which inform the story, or doing those dreamy camera pans and tilts. An interesting idea she's described during her work with Denis is writing the movie on set through how the images are created. Arriving in a space where all the ingredients are put together, from the location to the actors, the mise-en-scène and costumes, and then writing the film by creating frames in the moment, rather than the standard idea of getting a script and then illustrating what has already been written. I've noticed that her framing often includes vertical or horizontal lines within frames which intersect the image, whether from architectural or production design elements, or from using the line of a straight horizon to cut across the frame. Before we get into the technical side of what camera gear she uses, I'd like to thank our sponsor Squarespace. If you want to be a cinematographer like Agnes, one thing you'll need is a website, which is like an online business card that collaborators and clients can use to get in contact with you and view a portfolio of your work. Squarespace makes setting up your website easy and intuitive with their new guided system Squarespace Blueprint. All you need to do is select from their custom curated layouts and styling options to build a site tailored to your needs. Then integrate your social accounts to better promote your brand and use their optimized SEO tools to get your work seen. So head over to Squarespace to get started with their free trial. And then when you're ready to launch your site, go to squarespace.com/indepthcine to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. As we mentioned, perspective and distance hold a very important place in her work. Her decisions as to where to place the characters and the camera also have a direct impact on the kind of gear which she selects. Rather than choosing very wide-angle lenses and shooting them from a close distance to the character, as has become a popular cinematic trope nowadays, she instead often selects medium focal lengths or telephoto lenses, like a 40mm or longer, and places the camera a bit further away from the actors. These longer lenses compress the image more, making the background feel closer to the characters and creating a layered feeling of depth, where different planes of foreground and background layers are pushed together and assembled within the frame. This effect of using long focal length lenses is particularly noticeable in exterior wide shots, where far off landscapes feel like they are looming right behind characters. These compressed backgrounds place characters alongside their environment, rather than shooting with wide-angle lenses that distances the background from the subject. Longer lenses with their lack of distortion also make lining up vertical or horizontal straight lines in shots a bit simpler. A secondary effect shooting on longer lenses has is that she can place lights further away from characters. The wider focal length that is chosen, the closer the camera will have to be to characters, and therefore the closer lights will have to be placed to actors so that the camera won't come in between lights and cast shadows. Godard prefers to have some distance between the light source and the subject, which sometimes makes shooting further away on longer lenses easier, as the camera and crew won't get in the way of the light source. Her camera selection has been split between shooting on 35mm film in her earlier work and on digital cameras in more recent years. During her early work, she often favored a lighter camera, which could be easily operated for handheld and could fit into tight spaces, which for her was an Atton 35 camera body. She paired this camera with different spherical lenses, normally favoring the height of taller aspect ratios like 1.85 or 1.66, and staying away from the widescreen anamorphic look. Some lenses she's used include the Zeiss standard speeds, Cooke S4s, and Panavision 70mm and Primo glass. Shooting 35mm film with its wider perspective than 16mm on the Atton 35 with Panavision Primo primes that resolve beautiful skin tones accurately with a fast T1.9 stop was a combination she often arrived at, and can be seen in her iconic work on Beau Travail.
I really wanted to have these 35mm perspectives because I thought that to see the bodies, the men in the landscapes, it was the thing. Then I chose very performant lenses, so I worked with Primo lenses from Panavision, and they were fantastic. The only thing is that they are quite big.
She's also used zoom lenses quite often, usually from Ingenieux, such as the classic 24-290mm, the 15-40, and even the new EZ full-frame 22-60 and 45-135mm zooms on her more recent work. She combined this with a teleconverter when she needed to extend her focal range even further. After transitioning to digital cinema with the Arri Alexa Classic, she's since moved to mainly using Sony camera bodies, from the earlier model f/65 to, in more recent years, using the Sony Venice. This change in camera selection from the lightweight Atton 35 to the large cumbersome Sony f/65 also yielded a change in approach to how the camera moved. The Atton allowed her to operate raw handheld over-the-shoulder shots, or easily place the camera on boats, trains or tight spaces to get shots which vibrated or shook with the movement of said transportation method. Whereas the larger weight and size of the f/65 meant that movies like Let the Sunshine In were shot completely off either a dolly or tripod, which stabilized the camera and gave the images a more grounded feel. Her lighting largely leans into a natural look, using sunlight whenever she can, whether it's soft, diffused, luminant and ambient, or hard, direct and sharp, with strong shadows. For day interiors, she often supplements this with large bounced or diffused sources, which illuminates actors with a very soft quality. Then during night scenes, she has a tendency to introduce color, sometimes favoring warm tones such as sodium vapor street lamps, and other times going for cooler tones from blue to a teal. Although her exact approach has shifted from film to film and director to director, there's a certain natural, dreamy, reactive, wandering quality to her photography which has carried through, transforming the camera from a machine that captures light into a perspective and point of view of an observer in the room. Thanks for getting to the end of this video. Let me know if you've seen Agnes's work down in the comments. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by signing up to Patreon to get this content ad-free. Otherwise, until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.